Hey everybody, welcome to Crazy Tech Lab, and today we are going to be seeing how to install a 240mm liquid cooler, specifically the MAG Coreliquid E240 from MSI. This is a 240mm liquid cooler, pretty easy to install, but it helps if you get the orientation the right way. Don't have to worry about the orientation with the pump though, because this thing has a rotating pump head. We're going to be looking at that again in a minute. Also, how and where to install your fans. So if you buy this liquid cooler out there, you can basically follow this video and install it in pretty much any case that has the clearance for it. So that's what this video is all about today. If you want to check out my review of this cooler to see how it actually performed, you can check the video in the banner up above or see the link in the description below. Did pretty well with an Intel Core i5-12600K, and that's part of the system that we will be using today as well. So this video today is all about how to install the MSI MAG Coreliquid E240 into your PC. So let's crack on. So here we are with the motherboard of choice here, which is the MSI MAG X670E Tomahawk Wi-Fi. And this is one of the more affordable X670E boards out there, and you can see a guide on how to use it for overclocking and how good it is in one of my other videos. I'll link to that in the description of banner up above and the description down below. Today we're going to be using it as our test subject to install the cooler. So what we've got here is the Coreliquid E240 liquid cooler, and we're going to be installing this onto this motherboard. So notice here I've got the AMD mounting brackets installed, and the only thing you need to search for in the box are the AMD mounting brackets. Nothing comes mounted to this as standard. You have to put either Intel or AMD on, and then you just need to find the 4 bracket screws, which are handily labeled in the bracket screw bag. So that's pretty much all you need to do to install it onto AMD. So as you can see there are 4 screws at the end. The only thing I would note is that I had to use a fairly small screwdriver to install those. My standard trusty screwdriver, which usually fits in anything, just didn't quite line up with those screws. So it was just a little bit too small. Or the screws were a little bit too small, the screwdriver was a little bit too big. So just bear that in mind when you're securing these brackets. You also need to install brackets specifically for Intel. And if you are using an Intel system, you'll also need to use the backplate. And then it's a similar configuration on the top side, albeit you're using 4 thumb screws instead of these much easier mounting clips that just hook over the clips on the motherboard there. So that's pretty much all we need to do to kind of get things ready. I prefer to install the motherboard first and then install the cooler. So it's up to you what way round you want to go. You can go the other way to basically install the cooler to the motherboard out of the case. That's the way I'd go with an air cooler, but this time we're going to go with installing the motherboard first. So obviously the next 2 things we need to do are install the CPU and memory, which we'll do quickly, and then we can add our thermal paste to the processor, which MSI includes, and then we can get everything installed into the case. So we have our memory and CPU installed, and we are going to quickly put on some thermal paste. The top side of the die is pretty small here, so I just like to put a very, very thin line going right up the center of the CPU, and that's usually a really, really good way of not using too much paste, but also not using too little, and allowing the thermal paste to spread over the cooler, or the heat spreader, should I say, and between the heat spreader and the cooler. So MSI including enough thermal paste there for several applications, which is kind of a good idea because you might want to upgrade your CPU, you might want to remount the cooler, and it's just a good idea to reapply the thermal paste each time you do that. So good job from MSI there, including enough paste for several applications. So once your motherboard is installed, it's a simple matter of working out where you actually want to mount the cooler. So here we're going to be installing it in the case, but something to just be aware of is that you kind of want to have the radiator above the pump as much as possible, because it just helps with coolant flow and that kind of stuff. And as you've probably seen, there are videos out there that have kind of warning videos about, you know, not having the pump higher than the radiator, for example. There aren't too many situations where you can do that, but basically the radiator acts like the reservoir in this loop, and you want the air to be bled out of the of the loop as much as possible. And coolant does evaporate over time. So what we kind of want to do here is, first of all, get the orientation of our cooler, and then work out which way around you want to do it. Because in some cases you might want to flip it around, and you might want to have it, you know, this way around in the case, so that there's no reason why you wouldn't want to do that really, if your case is kind of has that kind of layout. But with this one, what you want to do is definitely just install it like that. And then if you just hold it in the roof, what you can actually do is just offer up the cooler, and you can see that everything kind of fits there. And that's generally what I do to work out what way round to install a cooler. So here we've got the brand new, yeah, not going to do that. Now, when it comes to installing the radiator into your case, you will probably notice that in the roof, if it is radiator compatible, that it will have various sections that look like this, these cutouts, and these are basically radiator holes or fan holes. In this case, it actually supports much larger radiators than we're doing today. As you can see, there are 2 fan holes either side, so you can have 140mm radiators mounted either there, or you can swing it that way and do it like that. The inner sides are for 120mm models, which is what we're going to be doing today. So obviously, much larger radiators you can fit in here. But the benefits of having a 240mm radiator like this one is that it fits in pretty much most cases out there. So what you need to find next are the radiator screws. So I am just going to swing around and grab those. So they usually look like this. So they're much, much smaller. And again, when it says chassis screw on there, that's basically securing the radiator to your chassis. So these are the screws that you need to do. Generally, you don't need to use all of them. One in each corner of the radiator will be absolutely fine. But if you're going to get a bit OCD about leaving screws in the box, then of course you can add all of them. So now we've got the radiator screws and we know roughly where we are going to be putting the radiator in the case. We need to install the fans. Now what you want to do is have the open side, which is this side. That's the closed side with the brackets on the rear. This is the open side. The air will be going through this way and out that way, unless you have some kind of funky swappable fan, which are out there, but these are just standard fans. So the air will be expelled out of that way, and that is the side that you want to mount onto the radiator. So essentially, like so, that is how you want your fans. Now, what we also need to do is align the cables so that they are facing the motherboard tray, because what you don't want is to have these facing outwards, if at all possible, because then they'll just be visible, and you don't want them to be visible in your case. You're just going to make your life a lot harder in terms of cable tidying and all that kind of stuff. So what we need to do is work out which way around these fans are going to be mounted on the case, and then we can mount them to the radiator in a specific orientation to make sure that, that doesn't happen. So we know that we've got the radiator this way round and it's going in there. So basically we need the cables to be on this side where I've got my hand at the moment. You might want to just mark it or put a bit of sticky tape on there or something. But this side is the side that we need the cables to be, like so. So now I need to grab the fan screws, which I'm hoping are in one of the bags in here. And these are the jobs here. So these basically pass through the fan and secure each fan to the radiator. And in general here, you'd absolutely definitely want to have a fan in each of the 4 corners. So you can, as I mentioned earlier, you can probably get away with just using 4 of the radiator screws. You do get 8 because there are 8 points on the radiator, 4 for each fan. But if you're just mounting the radiator to the case, I don't usually use more than 4 because at the end of the day, the radiator is not going anywhere if you've got a screw securing it to the case in each 4 corners. So you do want to use all the fan screws though, because it can lead to a vibration. So you want that fan to be secured really, really well onto the radiator. And even though these fans that are included with the cooler do actually come with anti-vibration mounts, you can see the little rubber mounts down there, which is a good thing to have. So we need to line these up and then just secure them in like so. And then we're just going to go ahead and do exactly the same on the other fan. And you don't need to watch me doing that. So we'll fast forward, we'll get the fans installed, and then we can start installing the cooler into the case. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the fans do have daisy chaining RGB cables, and by daisy chaining what I mean is if we just remove the protective cap there, you will see that one of these connectors on one fan has pins and on the other one it has a socket. So what we want to do is connect these two up. Would help if I actually get it the right way around. There we go. So connected those two up. Those two fans are now connected, and what you can do now is run this cable off, which comes from one of the fans, off to your motherboard or RGB controller or something like that, and that means that both of these fans' lighting will be controlled from one header on your motherboard. Now the pump has a separate header, so there isn't really any other way of combining the two unless you went with a further splitter cable, which unfortunately MSI doesn't supply. But if you want to control your lighting for the fans and pump separately, which a lot of you will probably do, then you'll need to connect them separately to your motherboard anyway. That's probably what I would do. I might want to have my pump as a fixed color and then have my fans kind of cycling on a rainbow mode or something like that. So that we're all set up with that. And then we've got the PWM cables here as well that run off to our motherboard. So what I'm just going to do now is just get rid of the little cables that secure, or the little cable ties that secure the cables, because what we want to do is pass these cables through our motherboard tray before we install this or secure it into the case, or at least just detach these things, because they're a pain to deal with if they're stuck behind the cooler, wedged between the cooler and your motherboard. So what we would do now is just remove all of these and just make sure you do this before you install the radiator in your case. And once we've done this, we're pretty much ready to go. So that is it. We're all good. So we are ready to install the cooler into our case. So we have everything nicely connected in our case in terms of hooking the radiator up into the roof, and we've threaded everything through to the back panel so we can now start plugging everything in. And what I've done to start with, you can see here we've got some daisy chaining going on with the RGB cables connecting the pump to one of the fans, which is what we've done here. Remember, we did the daisy chaining a minute ago with the RGB cables, and the first fan I've connected to the second fan, and then all three components, both fans and pump, are now routed through this connector here. So what we need to do now is either use the RGB hub that we've actually got in this MSI case. If you don't have an RGB hub, you will need to use your motherboard. And I've just got a motherboard here, which is an MSI MEG, I think, X570 Unify. So we're just going to plug this port in over there like so. So that is, hopefully you can see that on camera. I'll just do that again, maybe with a slightly closer port. Just look for the 3-pin port down here, and you should be able to just plug your RGB device into one of those connectors like so. And that is all you have to do to hook up your RGB lighting. We are going to use the hub on our MSI case because that's a really good feature to have, and we've got a couple of spare ports and things that we can use here. So you've got some daisy chain cables here, and I'm just going to use one of these because it's a little bit easier to get my fingers around rather than using a spare port on the hub, and make sure it's connected the right way around. And there you go. So that's us connected, all the RGB lighting up, so we know that our fans and the pump will be all looking very nice indeed when we power up the system. So the next thing we've got to do is to deal with the PWM cables, both for the pump and for the fans. So what we'll do now is route these back through, but not kind of all the way through. We just want a little bit of cable poking through, enough for us to tidy up the cables and connect these to some 4-pin PWM headers on our motherboard. So we are back around the other way now, and something else we need to chat about are the actual cables for connecting the pump and fans. So MSI includes a splitter cable for the fans. You can see here we've got 2 PWM cables running off there, and we've got a single connector to connect to your motherboard. That's a really great idea because it just means that you won't need to take up hundreds of 4-pin PWM headers on your motherboard. So all we need to do is connect that end to our CPU fan header, and these two to our fans. Now for the pump, you have a couple of options. You can either use the cable that MSI has included here, which is a 4-pin Molex cable, so you can connect that end to your power supply and this end to your pump, and that will just ensure that it is running at full speed, which you may or may not want to do. If you don't want to fiddle around with pump speeds, I'd highly recommend using this cable and just running your pump at full speed. If you want to dial it back for whatever reason, maybe to cut back on noise or something, then what you'll need to do is connect the pump to the pump header on your motherboard, which on this motherboard is just up there by the processor socket. So it should be around this area here if you're needing to connect the pump the pump cable to your motherboard. So what we're going to do now is just find our fan cables, and then we are going to thread them through and hook them up to the CPU fan header. So we've got one cable here, and then the other one is over there. So we're just going to thread those through, and because the CPU header is over the left side of the motherboard, makes sense to use one of the cable routing holes that's over that way as well. And then down here we have the 2 cables. We're going to hook those 2 up, and there we have our CPU cable, and then the CPU fan header is just up there, and we can hopefully get it plugged in. And then what you want to do is just pull those cables back through to the back of the case, because we don't need all that slack here. We just need to kind of get rid of all of that. And that's another great idea behind using a splitter cable, is that you only have 1 cable to deal with when you're doing this, and not 2, or maybe 3 if you've got a larger radiator. So that's it for the processor fans. So we are all connected there, and with the pump, as I've said, just find the pump header on your motherboard, and it should be labeled. It is on most motherboards, or you can use the connector to hook it up straight up to your power supply. And that is how you install the cooler.